What do you mean we missed it?
Because no, like we don't get to do it this session. Post. She's still not feeling good.
Oh, we must have posted it like the exact same time because I didn't see that. Or I just
Yeah,
wasn't paying attention.
I think she's pretty much better. She's just still got the coughing issues.
Yeah, it
Oh,
sounds kind of like what I had those couple weeks ago because it was 2 weeks and it was like 3 weeks before my voice was better.
Yeah, timestamp shows you guys at like a minute apart, so
okay. Well, I guess Alexa can continue to carry her.
I know, she's
Yay!
my Yoda Beck.
Yeah. Okay, well, one of the reasons I wanted to start early was because I wanted to talk about some updates that I made to hopefully balance combat more and other such things. So, yeah, do we have anything else we need to talk about, or should I just start with that? We can get started.
Well, are we going to be in combat this session? Or we could just kind of skip that and explain it next session.
But it's good to get it out now.
I mean, we're
Just
probably...
lay it down and be done with it.
Yeah. So I'll give you guys the quick rundown. So basically, like we discussed at the end, I talked with Zarian. I think you were the one who suggested having more steps on the condition track. So the problem is that if you guys hit bosses, you guys have abilities to like move them down the condition track really quickly. So like the fight would be over once they move 5 down the condition track, which isn't good for having long fights, but it's also really boring, I realized, to just like not be able to hit the boss. Although I also wanted to point out that Alon finally was using assist and other with the attack, and that's totally a valid strategy.
Yeah, we talked about that already while you were gone.
Okay, so yeah. So I decided that the bosses are just going to, because the condition track moves from -1 to -10, but instead of moving down like to 2 to 5 to 10, they're just going to move down in 1-step intervals. So there's 11 steps total on the condition track for them, like -1 to -10, and then finally unconscious. And then a derivative of the shake it off feat is they're going to be able to recover +2 back up by taking 2 swift actions, but they have to make a DC 10 Constitution check, which will get harder the further down they are because they get a penalty to that. Then I also decided that balancing force powers is going to mean that bosses are going to have different resistances to different force powers based on how many turns the power will have a lasting impact on. So basically that means they have like a +15 to being held in place by move object and also to being forced to surrender from mind trick. And they have plus to other defenses like being knocked prone by force slam or getting affected by sever force or other things. But if you just want to damage them with powers like mind shard or move object to just deal damage, that'll just be normal. But I decided in order to balance it that it had to be different defenses to different powers because the powers aren't balanced. So I decided to do that. Also in line with the force, I was reading some other discussion threads, and what they did was they changed how the use the force bonus works, which is normally half your level plus your charisma modifier plus 5 if trained, plus 5 if you have skill focus. But the result of that is that early on, once you get focus and trained, then you're like basically as powerful as you're going to be in the force because you only get an additional +1 every other level. So there's another formula based on like you just get your 3/4 of your level, or if you have skill focus, you get your entire level bonus added to it, plus your charisma modifier, and then it's also modified by the number of force training feats you have. And the result of that is it increases more linearly instead of having a giant jump when you get focus in early levels and then like not increasing after that. Now it increases steadily all the way up to the end, and the end result is that at level 20 you actually end up with a higher modifier than you would using the other system, but it's like a little bit lower. So I think at level 10 some of you guys dropped like you dropped like 2 on your modifier. So I decided to do that because I thought it added to a better sense of progression if you actually got more powerful in the force as you leveled up instead of just like being really powerful from the beginning. Yeah, and then for out of combat force powers, I decided that most powers can only be used like once per hour or once per thing you're trying to do for the day or whatever, because it doesn't really reflect like a 1 second of trying the power. It just represents how your overall effort went. Like, oh, I'm going to try to meditate and do this force exercise for these 2 hours, and then one roll just determines your character's general mindset and how successful overall in general you were. But the flip side of that is if it's a power that you should just be able to do, like then either like if you have to make a roll for it, you can only make that roll once for that session. But if it's something that your character should just be able to do, then you're just not even gonna have to roll. If you're like, I'm gonna lift this boulder to do something, and it's like, okay, fine, you do that. You don't even need a roll. The only reason you'd have to roll is if there's a possibility of failing, and then that failing should be influenced more than just waiting 10 minutes to be able to use the thing 10 times and then succeed.
It should have a negative consequence. So like you pick up the boulder, but you drop it in a bad place.
Yeah. And then I changed, we did this last session, but I changed how stun works. So basically I decided that against flat-footed enemies, aka people you have trapped and you're trying to just knock them out, is that stun damage is always going to move 1 on the condition track instead of only moving 0 if it doesn't go above the damage threshold, then -2 if it does. It's going to move -1 regardless, but it will move -2 if it goes above their damage threshold. And I also found out that in the core rulebook, the damage listed on some weapons for stun is like lower than their actual damage, but in later rulebooks they've corrected that, and that's actually not how it's supposed to be. So if your weapon can do stun damage, it's the exact same amount of die as you would normally do, except it's just stun instead of regular. Yeah, and then healing was once per med pack per distinct injury rather than for 24 hours. We already did that. And then I also went through and I added a little spreadsheet of all of your guys' health, attack bonus, use of force bonus, all the average damage you guys can do, then what all of your reflex, fortitude, and will defenses are. And then I made this little chart about if I want the enemy you're facing to have a 75% chance or 66% or 50 or 33 or 25 or 10% chance to hit you, then I get to know what attack bonus they need to have in order to do that amount. And then I calculated how much damage they have to be able to do on average in order to knock you guys out in a certain number of turns. And I did the same thing for the enemies. Like, if I want you guys to be able to hit an enemy 50% of the time, what does their reflex defense have to be? And how much health should they have in order to survive for certain amounts of turns? Because previously when I was designing enemies, I was just designing them according to the rulebook, but now I'm just going to pretty much pretend they have whatever feats and talents and whatever necessary to have these stats and just give them the stats. And hopefully that'll make combat a lot more fun, because the overall result is that you guys are going to be able to hit enemies a lot more, but they're also going to be able to hit you. So hopefully there'll be more jeopardy and more healing and more damage and a lot more exciting things. I also realized that basically, according to my calculations, if force powers and regular attacks are targeting the same defenses, then that sort of throws off the calculation. So basically most enemies have a +2 bonus to resist force powers based on what their reflex and fortitude defenses are to go against regular powers, which just makes it so that they have the same chance to hit. Obviously, like for super lame bad guys, that probably won't play into effect, but just for like most enemies that are supposed to be tougher, they just have, like if they have 20 reflex defense, they have like 22 reflex defense against force powers. I think we'll try that out and see how balanced that makes it. So in my giant barrage of information, does anyone have any comments?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Did you write all of this stuff down to pass along to future GMs so that they can remain consistent?
Yep.
Okay, good.
In this chapter of the campaign log, I added a whole little header. That's what I was going down on my headers of descriptions. I wanted to that's why I also put in the stuff about healing and stunning and stuff. So now like if we have to refer back to it, we can look at this.
That's how he was able to talk so fast.
Yes, that is also how I was able to talk so fast.
No,
He's
he's
right
just been rehearsing it all day.
And
like,
I have this little, and I also made it an Excel sheet that automatically calculates. So when you guys level up and you get more powerful, it'll automatically calculate what your enemy stat should be. So you don't have to like manually calculate that every time.
I do have a request because of the large modifications to force powers and stuff. I would like to switch out one force power, just one usage of move object to something else, so that I'm more viable in combat.
Okay. Yeah,
mind shards for
do
days.
Yeah, I was also considering. I mean, that same one where they were that thread where they were discussing changing the force. They also wanted to buff certain powers because so move object does damage, and there's also like the one where it's basically just a blast of telekinetic energy, like in Force Unleashed. I forget what it's called, but basically it has like the same DCs, but it does like drastically less damage, and it's like the same power. It's like it should be balanced. So like otherwise, move object was clearly better. So like they were suggesting that like all the powers be like modified, but I haven't gone that
I like
crazy
your
with it yet.
changes to make force power make it easier to to give more resistance to force powers and stuff. But with how limited the amount of uses of them there are.
Mhm. Yeah, we'll have to see how it works out.
Yeah.
Because basically before the enemies just had high defenses, so you should, even with force power, still be able to hit enemies more frequently than you could before. So hopefully that will work out, except if you try to use super powerful things like mind trick them to surrender. Then they have a higher defense against being mind tricked to surrender than they have against being mind tricked to drop their gun, because that will only last.
So it's
And then
just against
until I get
certain
dominate
wind
mind, and then I
things.
can have them.
Yeah,
do
so they
whatever
have like
want
a
on the next
resistance
turn.
to being held in place by move object, but they don't have a resistance to being whacked by move object, just because
Or
I decided-
thrown real quickly by it.
yeah, they can be thrown. They just can't be held in place. Basically, any
As
power
easily.
that's going to have an impact greater than one turn, then I decided that it should be harder to use than a power that just would like last one turn.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, so then, like I said, even though with the change to the use of force formula, like I said, you guys dropped like about 3 points, but since I
You changed
calculated
that on our
in what your
character sheets
lower,
already.
yeah, I changed on your character sheets.
Okay.
So if you look at your character sheets, I only changed it on the people who actually have used the force, but
I'm
if you
noticing
take
now that I
another
have like a
instance-
random +1 instead of a random -1. Did you like?
Yeah, it says in the notes that's because you have 2 training, you have 2 force training. So every time you take the force training feat, you get to increase your +1. So like Paz has 4 force training, so he
okay.
has +4
Okay.
now. So if
Okay,
you
that
take
makes
another
sense.
force training, you have to get another. You have to give yourself another plus. But other than that, the formula should work out. But I took the lower use of forces into consideration when calculating these numbers for how the enemy should be. So really, the only thing that got affected was if there are powers that have like set DCs to do certain things. But we'll look at those as they come up. I also went through and got a lot more music, and hopefully I'm going to try using that out, because I was listening to a lot of music while I was brainstorming all this stuff and what should happen next.
Music is a secret GM tool. Secret.
Yes, although I
Formula.
realized that the Mandalorian blockade is, in my mind, that's like the theme music for the Legends of the Force, because it comes up so much that like I associate it. Here, I'll turn it on and roll 20. You guys can see which one I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Where is it?
Is it the one I use for Ajax?
Classic.
Yeah. It's the startup music for the older book.
Yeah. Oh, maybe this isn't the one I was thinking of. Maybe I was thinking of Mandalorian.
I think it's like Mandalorian Assault or something. That's the one
Yeah.
you were actually thinking of. It's like
Uh-huh.
the battle music. We've used that one before, but not a lot.
Oh, anyways, I'm just wasting time. It was some music that just sounds like combat in this game. Anyways, so are we all ready to get started?
Yep.
Yeah.